Okay. Welcome. I'm going to try to do this slightly differently this time. So the last lecture I gave was, I didn't have my lecture with me. So there were a few things that I did right off the top of my head, and one of them was when the Hanseatic League started. And I think I told you 1181 at one point and 1381 at another point. It's 1159 is roughly the time when the Hanseatic League starts, and it lasts through the 1300s. So this is before all the events that I was talking about, the Protestant Reformation, all the wars and things like that. And my point in talking about that class was how the Hanseatic League sort of changes Europe, particularly Northern Europe, to create this sort of class of merchants, and the ways in which their sort of practices, their everyday practices, come to contribute to the Protestant Reformation in Northern Europe. Okay, today I want to follow the Protestant Reformation and the conflicts of the Protestant Reformation to both Europe and the New World. And this is important in part as background to the Puritans, so that we understand what the Puritans are about, the Pilgrims are about. Understand that they're not, the sort of kumbaya people sitting around holding hands with Indians, that this is, when we're thinking about the Puritans, we should be thinking about brutal and violent conflicts in Europe over the future of Europe and the future of the New World. To do that, I think we need to think about this guy, Charles V, his Holy Roman Empire that I was talking about, which he builds in large part using the gold he's acquired from, the PowerPoints are, the old PowerPoints are on the Google Drive. I will keep adding the new PowerPoints to the Google Drive as we go along. Does that make sense? So the 2021 PowerPoints are there. The 2022 PowerPoints, I'm going to keep adding to that drive. There's a link to the drive in ELC. Sorry, okay, so Charles V's Holy Roman Empire. The questions today are, what happened to it? How did the Catholic-Protestant divide map onto conflicts over the Americas? And then finally, how did the Protestant Reformation change England? We need to understand these conflicts because they help us understand the differences between northern and southern colonies, for example. The issues that helped motivate and make it possible for Britain and France to wedge its way into an empire that's kind of a monopoly at first. Okay. So remember I talked about Charles V before. He starts out as the king of Spain, and then he becomes king of Spain and Portugal, and then he becomes the Holy Roman Emperor. He does this in large part because of all the wealth that he's accumulated from the New World. Does that make sense? So all of this wealth that's coming over on those galleons, on those treasure ships from the New World are providing this tremendous wealth. One of you in the packback called it the price revolution, and that's the sort of, the price revolution is that same thing. It's the rapid inflation that takes place in this period because of all this silver and gold. What does he do with the silver and gold? He basically goes on a path towards expansion. He crowns himself, well, he's crowned by the Pope as a Holy Roman Emperor in 1519, the same year as Cortez is just arriving in at Tenochtitlan. He dies, though, in 1556, the age of 56, kind of at the height of his powers. And the map I showed you before gives you a sense of all of the real estate he acquires with that wealth, right? So there had been a Roman Empire going on, in 50 BC, 100 AD. This Holy Roman Empire is an attempt to kind of recreate the spectacle of a massive empire, and it lasts for a few years. All those colors are in the hands of Charles V at the height of his powers. But it's incredibly costly. When he dies in 1556, he's replaced by his son, Philip II, and let's see, 26 to 57. So he's 29 years old. Do I have the math right there? He's 29 years old when he takes over from his father. Relatively young. And with all of this money, with all this wealth coming from enslaved labor in the New World, this is mostly Indian enslaved labor, or this is almost entirely Indian enslaved labor at first, or goods that are coming in from that encomienda system. And some people will tell you that the Spanish Armada is the most important event in this period, but I want to tell you that the Battle of Lepanto is a really important battle. Why? Because it ends the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. From 1453 till the 1570s, the Ottoman Empire has been expanding across the Mediterranean. It's taken over the old Byzantine Empire. And so these two empires are on a collision course, right? The Holy Roman Emperor, who controls this region in northern and western Europe, and the Ottoman Empire, which controls southern and eastern Europe. And at the Battle of Lepanto, which is the biggest naval battle possibly in the history of the world, 400 ships, over 400 ships, probably 250 or so on the Ottoman side, about 200 or so on the side of the Catholic League, which Philip II is the head of. The fear, and it's a justifiable fear, is the Ottoman Empire is going to capture Rome because it's there's the siege of Malta in 1556. This Ottoman Empire is expanding, and so this is an incredibly costly enterprise to defeat the Ottoman Empire. And they're not fully defeated, but they are kind of slowed down. One of the Ottoman princes, when he was after the Battle of Lepanto, was a European Christian, was bragging about how he had defeated the Ottomans. He said, "What we did when we took Malta, which is the island in the Mediterranean, is we cut off your arm. What you did at the Battle of Lepanto is you just cut our beard, and the beard will grow back." But in fact, 1571 is an important date because it starts to see the Ottoman Empire decline. It no longer has the power in Europe that it did previously. Before 1571, most Christians believed that the Ottoman Empire was soon to take over all of Europe. No one could stand up against the Ottoman Empire. The Janissaries of the Ottoman Empire, the soldiers and the battleships of the Ottoman Empire. But this is a turning point in Christian, if you will, power. And again, this is important to understand because it control of the Mediterranean means access to goods from the east. Control of the Western Mediterranean means that some of the monopoly of the Ottoman Empire will be broken. But as I said, this is incredibly costly for Philip II. In fact, as you can see, the empire is bankrupt in 1557, and then again in 1560, then again in 1569, again in 1575, and in 1596. What that means is he can't pay back the people who lent him money, both the church and the merchants who lent him money for these massive enterprises. So he's he's drawing all this wealth from the New World, but he's got these grand ambitions that keep holding him back. He almost controls France as a puppet state in this period. He's I'm going to get in trouble with French historians if I push too hard on this. But England as well. He marries Mary the First, and if the two of them have a child, and that child is a boy, then Philip II's son will become the King of England. These are all grand plans, and they all fail by the 1580s with the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Now let me talk, so here's an image of the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. The Catholic League defeats the undefeatable Turks and supposedly saves Rome from Turkish invasion. What Philip II is doing throughout Europe, as he's claiming control of much of Europe, he hopes to control Britain, is massacring civilians who are Protestants. And so somebody asked at the end of class, why is it that what was the word that other people think is important? Other people think is important is the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Why does he bankrupt the empire? Why does he bankrupt the empire almost immediately after becoming emperor? Is there a significant event in the year following his takeover? That's a great question. Most people think that Charles V basically handed over a bankrupt empire to Philip II. That basically, as early as 1556, that empire is in trouble because it's spending way more than it's drawing in. Okay. What areas do the Ottomans have in contrast to the Holy Roman? The Ottomans, they control the Balkans, what's now Bosnia, Herzegovina. They control all of the Black Sea, the whole area of the Black Sea. They control the route, indirectly, they control the route to China overland. And the Ottoman Empire has beachheads almost all the way to Budapest in Hungary. So a lot of South and Eastern Europe is under Ottoman-controlled regions. This is important if you want to understand, too, some of the conflicts in the Balkans that we saw in our own lifetime, or in your lifetime. Let's see. Maybe before you were born. The Balkan conflicts, a lot of those have to do with these ancient conflicts inside the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so what is the... thank you again for these questions. The Ottomans are so superior, how were the Catholics able to defeat them? Cannons. Mounted cannons on top of those ships. The Turks beat, in 1453, when the Turks took Constantinople, they did it with cannons. It was a Budapest manufacturer who converted to Islam, who made it possible to break down the walls of Constantinople and let the Ottomans take over it. But by the 1500s, the Europeans learned this trick, and not only do they have great cannons, but by the 1540s and 1550s, they have cannons mounted on ships. Most of these ships don't have sails; they're actually powered by they're rowing ships. But yeah, it's basically a story about cannon. That's a simple answer for this. Cannons on little ships. see if I can show that. It's hard to see here, but you see there's not a lot of sails in these cases. All of this is ship-to-ship combat. Lepanto is now what's in Greece. Okay, so what is Philip II up to? We've not had a quiz yet. I'm trying to make all the other deck work before I do the quizzes. Okay, so the Spanish Empire massacres civilians in the Netherlands, in Naarden, in Zutphen, Haarlem, Oudewater, during Maastricht. The number that's thrown around, and we don't really know for sure, is about 500,000 people are killed by Philip II in his drive to take over. And many of these are civilians, women and children, a lot of them. Philip II also has assassins. So William of Orange, which you might have, that might be a name that's familiar to you. William of Orange is a sort of popular Protestant character. He's a prince in the Netherlands. And Philip II hires an assassin who kills him. The Protestants in turn do the same. They hire assassins to try to kill people connected with, particularly generals and others who are connected to the Holy Roman Empire. If you've ever seen the game Assassin's Creed, it grows out of this period when there's assassins on both sides trying to wipe out the Holy Roman Empire, trying to wipe out the Protestant reformers, and vice versa. Let me talk a little bit about Elizabeth I before I talk about her Star Chamber. Okay, so Elizabeth I becomes the British monarch in, bear with me, 1558. Elizabeth, Mary the First, who Philip II marries, never has a son, and so there's no heir that's obvious. And so when Mary, there is some contest over who's going to be king, but the throne apparently moves from Mary the First to Elizabeth the First, her sister. When Elizabeth I becomes queen, she is a Protestant, but not much of a Protestant. She's not a strong Protestant. She's in the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church has bishops. The Anglican Church has, a lot of the liturgy that is very similar to the Catholic Church. The difference between the Anglican and the Catholic Church is relatively minor, but Elizabeth becomes more and more Protestant over time, as it's clear that Philip II wants to kill her. Right? Philip II is trying his best to. He declares her reign to be illegal. He gets the Pope to do this. And so Elizabeth I, who's called the Virgin Queen, because she never marries, never has a son, fights back, becomes increasingly more and more Protestant as she feels threatened by Philip II. Does that make sense? Back to my comments here. This, who did he hire the assassins to kill? He hired the assassins to kill William of Orange, but also other prominent princes. Yeah, William of Orange, thank you. Okay. So Elizabeth I then starts to commission the seadogs, as they call themselves. And this is people like Sir Francis Drake, who try to navigate around the world. Yeah. And the Holy Roman Empire is capturing and enslaving Africans. Mostly the Portuguese are doing this in this period. Sir Francis Drake starts to do the same thing. The motivation becoming more Protestant is, for Elizabeth anyways, is the threat of this Holy Roman Emperor who hopes to control all of Europe and eliminate all the monarchs. There are other reasons that people are Protestant, believing that they should be able to read the Bible on their own in their own language and things like that. So there's multiple motivations for being Protestant. Okay, the seadogs attack supply lines, sometimes with the Queen and her council as secret stockholders in these ventures. And this is something new. Rather than directly attacking Philip II, she creates these companies and funds these ships which travel along the Spanish Main and try to get gold and silver. At one point, the seadogs capture all of the galleons that are going from the New World to Europe. And in that year, Queen Elizabeth's income doubles, more than doubles. So Elizabeth's response to the threat of Philip II is to sponsor these raiding vessels, but not in the way that kings and queens used to do, which is by basically directly challenging them, but by creating these companies of pirates called the seadogs. Privateers, they call themselves. They say they're not pirates, they're privateers. They don't fly a British flag, but they do capture these goods and bring them back to Britain, particularly gold and silver. Why is it important that they're stockholders? Well, stockholders are interesting because if you have stockholders, you can use a lot more money to attack Philip II, right? It's not just the Queen's money anymore. Some random rich widow in the north of England who has money to spend might invest in a company like, and many do, invest in one of these companies to raid Philip II's treasure ships and then get back a portion of that take. That whole idea of using stockholders to contribute to wars is something that Elizabeth and her council learned from the Dutch. Because remember, the Dutch don't have a king, the Dutch have these private companies, and these private companies have stockholders. Oops. And so England, a widow in the north of England can hold stock in a Protestant pirate venture to raid Spanish ships. And the use of other people's money is crucial for allowing Elizabeth I to do this. Is every Protestant a capitalist? No. Is every capitalist a Protestant? No. But there is, in a way, a blend of anti-Catholic sentiment and profit-seeking in English raids on those Catholic galleons, the Spanish galleons. Capitalist investment in private companies does fund anti-Catholic ventures. Does that make sense? Why is this important? Let's think. The most unequal place in the world today, still, is the Netherlands, the Dutch. That you have people whose great, going back 10 generations or more, wealth in that family through ownership of stock is very tightly and closely held. They have all sorts of social services, but a small, incredibly wealthy group of stockholders behind them. It's John Hawkins' cousin. John Hawkins is the person who starts with the seadogs. Francis Drake, the cousin of Francis Drake, who discovers how to open the west coast of South America and who circumnavigates the globe. The importance of circumnavigating the globe is that Philip II basically argued that the Pacific Ocean was just Spanish and Portuguese, right? And so basically they found another way through South America to get to the Pacific Ocean. Does that make sense? So that's why this circumnavigating the globe is important. It's not just important for sort of understanding how the world works, although it is important for that. It's also important because it allows the English. Capitalist investment funds piracy, basically privateering, Protestant privateering. Okay, so the Holy Roman Emperor has 3 beefs with Elizabeth. Support of piracy against his treasure ships, the apparent support of the Dutch, who are in revolt against Philip II. So technically, in Europe, a king is not supposed to support revolts against other kings, right? There's supposed to be a kind of gentleman's code. But Elizabeth I is probably secretly funding those Dutch merchants who are created their own Dutch Republic with no king or queen. Okay, I'll talk about Elizabeth's Star Chamber in a second. I jumped too quickly. So beef 1 is support of piracy. Beef 2 is apparent support of Dutch independence. And beef 3 is his kind of quasi-sketchy claim to the British throne. He claims even so he didn't have a son, he married the queen, and so he should therefore be king. That's not how succession works in Britain, but okay, where are we? Good. And now to the Star Chamber. With the wealth that Elizabeth I secures on her own account, she basically strengthens an organization that's a secret organization that's gone, not secret, but it's a little court whose proceedings are secret, called the Star Chamber. And the Star Chamber is a building inside Westminster, which is where the king and the queen live, that has above it on the top stars, right? So that you can see the stars. They're kind of painted on the ceiling. And in that secret Star Chamber, Elizabeth I holds trials against princes inside Britain who are otherwise outside the reach of the law. They start to torture people who they believe are holding information about riot or rebellion or theft. The Star Chamber is above the law. And so that, if you've seen those movies called Star Chamber, heard that expression Star Chamber, this is what it refers to, is this powerful Protestant organization that has its own set of laws and its own rules that does everything in secret, right? That's what Elizabeth's Star Chamber was. This is going to be important because the Star Chamber is where we get the Bill of Rights. The idea of the Star Chamber, the idea of an English monarch having all this power with a secret jury and a secret tribunal is the greatest fear of the Americans by the 1770s and 1780s. That a president might have his own Star Chamber. Okay. And then 1588, it's an important date. It's the date when Philip II sends an army of about 100,000, preceded by a navy of 30 or more ships, across the English Channel to invade and take England. Like the Battle of Lepanto, it's not exactly a clear victory or defeat, but in the sense that there's not a whole lot of prisoners taken or things like that. This whole plan that Philip II has to recapture England and make England Catholic, destroy the Anglican Church, and build up a Catholic majority in England, fails in 1588 when those ships crossing the English Channel face a storm. And the storm drives the French and Spanish ships around. It allows English ships, which stay rooted in those spots there, Plymouth, Portland, and the Isle of Wight, where they're basically bombarding the ships that they're trying to cross. The storm makes it possible to basically quickly defeat them, and those 100,000 soldiers never land in Great Britain. Elizabeth I says it's a Protestant wind that saves her, right? A Protestant wind. That God made that wind, made that storm, so that Catholics would be held back, that Philip II would not claim control of Great Britain. I know this seems like, it's like, what does all this have to do with the United States and American history? We'll get there. It is important. Okay, Elizabeth dies without a child. Okay, so the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 is the single biggest reason that this class is being held in English. Because it allows England and France to wedge its way into the New World. The defeat of the Spanish Armada is a defeat of Philip II of Spain. It allows the English and the French to wedge its way into the New World. Elizabeth dies without a child. It's called the Virgin Queen because she never marries. Her cousin James comes to power in 1603. And this is the beginning of what's called the Stuarts. And this is the beginning of the English settlement of the New World, where Elizabeth I was directly opposed to Philip II. James I is more of a peacemaker. He talked Spain into giving up a chunk of the land on the coast of Virginia, what we now call Virginia, where the Powhatans rule. It helps that Philip II, had to declare bankruptcy 5 times, right? So basically James I pays for this control. Now why does Spain and Portugal control this region? Back to the Treaty of Tordesillas, the Pope says it. So James I names Virginia, the Virgin Queen, after his cousin. Names Virginia after his cousin, the Virgin Queen, and that's why it's called Virginia. The first British settlement that's successful is in Jamestown, named after him. All right, so back to those central questions. That was a lot. Charles V's Holy Roman Empire, what happens? Hard to say for sure, but probably the Battle of Lepanto in 1571 cost so much money. The expansion across Europe cost so much money that it bankrupted this kind of attempt to control all of Europe by Philip II. The boom and the bust of Philip II's reign severely weakens the Ottoman Empire in 1571, but it ultimately fails to capture all of Europe. Secondly, how did the Catholic-Protestant divide map onto the conflicts of the Americas? Britain starts basically sponsoring piracy, attacking the treasure fleet as the conflict between Philip II and Elizabeth I comes to be about religion, this is important. Elizabeth makes allegiances with other Protestants, like William of Orange, like the people in the Netherlands. And why is the Netherlands important? Why is that region so important? There's a few reasons for that. Okay, so that the Netherlands is basically that area up there that looks like, I don't know, Batman, like a bat up on the top of Northern Europe. This is where the refugees go. The refugees from these wars between between Catholics and Protestants head up to the Dutch Republic. So the Netherlands is the most multicultural place in Europe by the 1560s and 1570s. All of these people have gone to escape from this violence to the one republic that's in Europe. And it's this republic that sides with Elizabeth I. And it's a Protestant republic. So what we see is this Protestant-Catholic divide is also a divide between Spain and Portugal on the one hand, Britain on the other. How did the Protestant Reformation change England? What the Protestant Reformation did in England was to bring debate over Christian doctrine out in the open. People have been debating Christianity since there was Christianity. Lots of people have had questions about the virgin birth or all the miracles in the Bible. There are lots of controversies about the role of the church. Is the Catholic Church the only route to Rome? Are they the direct descendants of the 12 disciples? But this comes out in the open, in printed discussion, as Elizabeth increasingly embraces Protestantism. Increasingly, there's a much more discussion about religion in Great Britain. That debate over Christian doctrine that starts in this period is going to lead to the troubled reign of Charles I. Okay? So James I, he rules for 20 years. He wedges his way into the New World. He gives out land to the largest and wealthiest people in Great Britain, who then control it. Charles I, who inherits this, is going to try to squeeze the Parliament for more money. He's going to try to push further his attempts to use the Anglican Church and enforce the power of the Anglican Church as his kind of personal religious army. And that's why at the beginning of Charles I's reign, he is 5'8". And at the end of his reign, he's 4'10". Because Protestants in Great Britain are going to cut off his head. We'll talk about that next class. The English Civil War, which helps us understand the mapping of the North and South, because it's people who tend to be Puritans and Protestants and radical religious critics of the Anglican Church that end up in the North, and it's supporters of the Crown who end up in the South. So we'll talk about the bloody English Civil War next class. Are there questions? I put down my tablet. Oh, yes, defeated the, thank you. Everybody's, yes, James replaced Elizabeth, defeated the Philip. Yes, Netherlands was definitely a Protestant refuge. I'll talk about why James squeezes Parliament for money next class. No, not too Catholic, too too greedy, basically. Peer responses, you want to aim for about, something above 50 points, ideally 80 or 90 points. You want to respond to the question that you're interested in or that piqued your interest. But again, use footnotes, right? Use not footnotes, but just refer to something in the book or elsewhere, Wikipedia, whatever. Instagram, as long as it's got a link, we're good. Okay, thanks.
To be clear, we can't use the book as a source. We would just say the, like Watson. The
Exactly. Yeah. That's totally fine. Yeah, you don't have to go outside. But if you think something's bogus, and there are some semi-bogus, but you can go to say some other source and just say, I'm dubious. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, you too, thanks.